struggle was not red. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the AZAPO online political education platform. We are here with Comrade Malala Ndlazi, who is going to be talking to us about the psychology of Black people in political power in South Africa. Welcome back to our platform. This is where we educate for liberation. Comrade Malala Ndlazi, welcome to our platform.
Comrade Ashe, thank you very much for the welcome. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Yes, no, that's great. And it's been a while since we have had some engagements, but before we get to the business of the day, I just want to introduce to you who Malala Ndlazi is. Comrade Malala Ndlazi is a trained psychologist, a clinical psychologist who was trained at the University of the Western Cape, and he left the university with a master's degree in clinical psychology. He completed his internship at Lenteguer Hospital. That's where he worked as a researcher. That's why he worked and did his internship, and then thereafter worked as a researcher at Stellenbosch University. Subsequently to that, he went on to lecture at the University of Witwatersrand, and during that period, he also started his private practice, which he managed for over 5 years. And then in 2005, he worked for the Department of Justice in the HR section, and then moved on to Assupol Life. First 2 years of that period, he was in the HR department, and for the past 11 years, he has been part of the sales department as a regional manager in KwaZulu-Natal. He is involved in community work, and that is where he is currently the deputy chairman of Child Survivors of Crime. He also serves on the Vlakfontein High School Alumni Association. That is Comrade Malala Ndlazi, and welcome again to our platform. And it's an interesting discussion topic that we are going to dissect, the issue of psychology of Black people in political power, and tracing back to what has been happening in our country since then. And Comrade Malala, can you talk to us and just give us your opening remarks about this matter? And thereafter, we can then have an open discussion. After the presentation, from Comrade, we will allow everybody who is connected to interact with Comrade Malala through the Q&A platform, and others can use the chat platform, or you can even raise your hand and make your contribution. We will also be monitoring those of you who are connected via Facebook, and we will take your comments and questions through so that you are part of this conversation. Comrade Malala, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Comrade Ash. But again, thank you for the opportunity. Maybe let me start by saying that, I think the difficulty with our problem maybe does not start now. I think especially the organizations who were supposedly in the forefront of the liberation movement, I think they moved from a premise of not wanting to radically change the system, but the premise they moved from was to be incorporated into the system. So if you think about maybe Frantz Fanon in his literature, one can observe that part of his contention is that most African leaders do not necessarily want to create a new system that would benefit Africans at the bottom of the rung. But essentially, they are fighting to be included into the current system. They want to be part of, if you think about it, the elite golf clubs that the white people belong to. They want to live in the suburbs, but they do not necessarily want to change the system. And I think from that, if you look at things from that point of view, you will make sense of what is happening currently. And the current situation is that the predominant thing that rules is about how much money you can make in a short space of time. But the money is not made at the cost of improving Black people's life. It's about taking from the Black people the little that is there to improve the Black people's lives and utilizing it for your own pocket. Think about the tender system. To a large extent, the tender system just explains that notion that Black people want to take the little that is there that should be utilized to improve the lives of other Black people, enrich themselves so that they can belong to the elite club, they can go to the golf clubs that are exclusive, they can live in the country estates that are exclusive, but it's not necessarily, and in that process, the one who holds the purse string says, if I give you this, you give me this in return. So it's not about servicing, it's not about service to the people. It's not about improving the lives of the majority. So I think that's one. Then if you look at another thing, another element of this is about education. What I think we've done, or the current system has done pretty well, and the leaders of the so-called leaders of the Black majority have actually upheld that system. The system has been created to ensure that the majority who are oppressed remain in poverty, one, and remain oppressed. But at the same time, the majority then look up to a small minority of Black people who supposedly are leaders of the liberation struggle, and they revere them. And essentially what they want to do is to make sure that those few remain in power. And the majority of people are thus not educated appropriately. If you look at our current education system, it is essentially made to ensure that majority of us do not become critical thinkers, and we do not want to create radical change to society such that we can develop the majority. So I think that's number two. So every policy that the people who are in power, the Black people who are in power, is not necessarily made to improve the majority, the lives of the majority. It's meant to ensure that they remain in the same position, but while remaining in the same position, they can vote for the elite to make sure that the elite retain power, and they can enjoy the privileges of power that come, or the benefit that come with it, but the majority remain poor. Now, I think that's the second. Then let me come to the third point. The third point is, now, in the name of poverty, I think the phrase that it utilizes is poverty alleviation. In the name of poverty alleviation, what those in power have done, one of the things they've done is they've created a system where, I think in the UK they call it the dole system, but the child grant in this country. So we have a grant that supposedly is meant to benefit people and is meant to reduce poverty. And I'm saying deliberately reduce poverty because the intention is not to eradicate poverty or to create wealth for the majority. It's just the intention is to alleviate poverty. So alleviate to a certain extent, reduce poverty to a certain extent that it becomes manageable, and people can say, well, since I've had this child grant, at least I'm able to buy my child milk. But that money does not sustain you for the rest of the month. It sustains you for a short period. Instead of coming up with policies that are meant to create job opportunities so that people can become independent, instead of coming up with policies that are meant to facilitate the creation of businesses so that people can become independent, the system has focused on alleviating poverty, reducing the burden so that a person can say, at least for 1 week in a month, 1 week I have something to eat, or for 3 days in 30 days, my child has got something to eat. That's the notion of alleviation. It says to you, at least you have something, but it doesn't say to you, these are the capabilities that you have, and we want to help you to utilize your capabilities to become an independent person who's not dependent on state, who is a contributor to society, and thereby improving your self-esteem as a human being. We focus on alleviation. So that's what the grant system has done. And if you couple the grant system with the horrible education system that does not want people to get out of poverty, that essentially trains people to become perpetual employees, look forward to someone to provide a solution to them. And they will stand on the sideline to say, but nobody's creating a solution, and therefore I will wait till somebody creates that solution. Maybe at this point, Tawa, I need to point out another thing that maybe it's probably an unintended consequence of what the powers, those in power have done. So the unintended consequence is that you have, because of all these policies, what has happened is that the people who are in the system, who are supposed to help government to ensure that its policies are implemented accordingly. In the process, what those people have realized is that it doesn't help, or there's nothing for them to gain to implement. They also need to amass as much wealth as possible at the expense of the masses, because they see that their leaders are doing the same. They're amassing as much wealth as possible for themselves at the expense of the masses. And I think it has created a sense of mentality in government to say, or in the public service even, not necessarily in government, but in the public service, to say, why should I stand on the sideline while I see my so-called leaders amassing wealth at the expense? So I will use the mechanism that the government has employed. I will use it to my benefit so that I can exploit the masses. And let me explain how. So for example, we have a serious problem in the justice system. There have been allegations that, for example, when women go into the system to request child maintenance, the clerks would say to the woman, it's fine, give me 200 rands, I'll make sure that your maintenance claim is put in the forefront because it takes too long. And the woman says, okay, here's your 200 rands. And then the clerk takes the 200 rands and goes to the alleged father to say, man, the mother of your child has come and made a claim, maintenance claim against you. Now, because I know the system pretty well, I can help you. I can make sure that this claim is delayed, it takes long, or even is thrown out of court. But you need to give me, say, for example, 2,000 rands. Now, the father, because probably he doesn't want to take responsibility for his actions or for his own child, what he does is that he pays the 2,000 rands. And then the poor child gets stuck in this system. But somebody in the system who understands it and is driven by greed, the greed that has been perpetuated by the leaders, or rather has been demonstrated by the leaders to say, it's fine to exploit the masses so that for your own personal gain, because they have used the system to their benefit. So that the employees are saying, if our leaders can do it, why don't we do it? And therefore, the system that's meant to protect children, that's meant to protect the masses, ultimately does not protect masses because, like I say, someone has role modeled bad behavior, and that bad behavior has gotten to the bottom of the rung, where the guy at the bottom of the rung wants to do the same. Now, and there are many instances of this. I think we've seen recently, we've heard in the news about government employees who are earning decent salaries, having applied for child grants during the period of COVID. Now, again, it's that system where the mentality to say, if my leaders are stealing what is available to the people, why can I not do the same? The behavior has been role modeled very effectively over the last 25 years or so. And it has been ingrained as part of culture to say, as Black people, we should not look forward to emancipating our people and doing our jobs very well, implementing the little resources that we have to the benefit of our people. The resources should be utilized for my own personal gain to enrich myself. And what do I do at the end of the day? When I have amassed that wealth, I go and flaunt it off in the township, where in the rural areas, especially in areas where there's extreme poverty, I flaunt it to the rest of society to say, look how much I have achieved. And everyone is supposed to revere us because you have supposedly achieved a lot, but that achievement comes at the expense of the masses. So I think that's another thing we need to think about. And if I can use an example also in the education system, unfortunately, education system, and especially our teachers, and again, I need to be cautious here, not all teachers are like that. But if you look at teachers that are affiliated to especially SADU in this case, if I can use SADU as an example, there have been a lot of allegations. In KZN, in about 3-4 years ago, there was supposedly an investigation done into SADU members selling jobs. So the allegation was that SADU members or shop stewards would say to people, I will ensure that you get a job as a teacher in this school. But after getting a job, then from your salary every month, you need to pay 1,000 rands to me for the rest of your life, or as long as you're employed in this school as a teacher. Now, there was supposedly an investigation, but nothing happened to that investigation. The investigation was launched 4 years ago. There was never any conclusion to the investigation. Nothing was done. But again, it's that system where leaders are not going into leadership because they want to develop people. It's because they have learned that in this system, we must use government resources or positions to benefit ourselves. And that's the psychology we have. We have a psychology of greed. We have a psychology of self-enrichment, of selfishness, that over the last 25 years, we've refined very well. Now, I must say, this psychology does not start 25 years ago. It probably started way back, even before the 25 years. If you recall, Comrade Ash, when I started the conversation, I said, part of the struggle, or some people in the struggle, they have the intention in waging the struggle was not necessarily to change the system, to create a system that will benefit Africans or the Black majority. Part of their vision was to say, we're waging a struggle so that we can be included, and included on the terms of the white control, the people who are in control, that is the white people. So if you're looking at that, you want to be included on their terms, you will do anything to be part of that system. You will not want to change anything. You will not want to change the education system. You will not want to change the healthcare system. You will not want to change the economy or anything. You want to maintain the status quo. And while maintaining the status quo, ensure that you and those affiliated to you or immediately associated with you are included in the system. And that way, you ensure that you are safe. But what majority of us don't realize is that in the process, we're creating a certain kind of ill health or psychological ill health. And what do I mean by the psychological ill health? In this case, we create and perpetuate a human being who is selfish, number one. We create and perpetuate a human being who is not developmental in nature. So this human being cannot create and innovate new ideas that will eradicate poverty and create wealth for his people and advance the cause of his people. This person only thinks short term. They think about the next 30 minutes, what's going to happen for the next 30 minutes. They cannot think beyond that. They cannot think what's going to happen in the next hour, in the next 2 hours, next day, 2 days, a week, and a month. Their interest is about the here and now. And because you're interested in the here and now, what you're going to do is you're not going to invest in critical things. You're not going to invest in a critical or in an appropriate education system. One, you are going to cut down research and development in your country, which is what has happened. When the ANC took over the last few years, what they did very well was to cut down on research and development, right? And a few years later, they realized this is not working, and they're supposedly now going back to increasing research and development in the country. What they did very well was to shut down TVET education system, right? Now, the problem is, like we've learned in the last 20 years or so, when you shut down TVET institutions, or what we used to call technical colleges in the olden days, is that you're taking away a practical skill that the majority could actually utilize. And you're encouraging the majority to go into university, right? But when they go into university, what courses are they going to take, really? They're going to end up taking courses that you don't necessarily need to create a change in the system. Let me give you an example. And this is no disrespect to any particular course. You're going to have a system where you're going to have a large influx of people taking theology, right? With the hope that they will become priests. But that's not really what they want. That person might have been better suited to be in a technical college where they could learn plumbing or metalwork or something that they could use, and they could use also to start off a business that will create a certain level of independence, right? Those technical colleges in the past had watchmaking. So some of those people learned the skill on how to create watches. That was a skill that could be benefited in this country. But we chose to move away from things that could potentially benefit our people and create a sense of independence and drive them to positions that encourage them to become employees, to make sure that they serve a particular master. And well, the majority of them would leave that university with a lot of debt and no particular job prospects. But again, they're also not trained to become independent thinkers and create their own jobs. And therefore they become frustrated in the system and they go back, they flood the township, and they create the impression to children in the townships and rural areas that education is not worthwhile. Because here's Malala, who went to university for 6 years and is unemployed. And what happens is that then in the process, when children see that this education is not worthwhile, and they in school are being taught by people who do not encourage independent thinking, they start to drop out of school because this thing is useless. It does not serve me in any way. And the teacher is actually not even interested in my own development. The teacher is interested in their own salaries, because everything they do and say demonstrate that they're only interested in getting paid at the end of the month. So the child drops out of the system and probably sees the only way out of life as being crime. For the majority of women, unfortunately, it's either they look forward to depending on a particular male, or some, unfortunately, we've seen in the last few years, is that they depend on prostitution. And this is where the irony kicks in. Then organizations that are pro-white people then start to say, actually, we must start liberalizing sexual work and taxing the prostitute. So for their own safety, we must legalize this entity or this job, legalize it. And once we've legalized it, we must tax them. And so that tax will then feed the system. But again, in feeding back into the system, it will not benefit the majority, unfortunately. So it's not the legalization, in my view, again, of prostitution. And probably we'll see the ANC entertaining in this a lot in the next few years. But it's not done to benefit people. It's not done because they want to protect sexual workers and all that. It's probably done so that they can get as much money out of them and back into the system and to use it for their own benefit. My time, I'm not sure if I've exceeded my time. I need to be cautious.
If you want another minute to conclude, you may, and then we can engage in some conversation.
So maybe in conclusion, my tower is to say that because we've created a very dependent person over especially in the last 25 years, the system has enhanced and strengthened to make sure that this person is independent. Our people then do not see themselves as resources to get out of. Right? So we've adopted the mentality of the leaders to say, the only thing I should really look forward to is to be in that position of power, either in municipality, provincial legislature or national legislature. Alternatively, if I can't get into those, I should work towards being in the procurement department so that I can exploit the resources to my own benefit. Now, here's the problem. Here's the kicker. Once you say at the community level, you say to our own people, let us start working slowly but surely towards a definite goal that would improve our circumstances. Like in my case, when you start saying to people, let us work, we've started an alumni association. And we're saying to the guys, anyone who's been through this school, let us pay our dues, contribute towards the school so we can make sure we build maybe a computer lab, we fund children through varsity, and we support teachers. And the typical response of most of us is what? But my children don't go to that school. That's the first thing. How can I utilize my money to the benefit of other children? We don't understand that it's the same children who live next to our parents. If we can save that one particular child and save two children, they'll see the value in remaining in the educational system. But we can also bring them closer to guide them differently in terms of what we want. We can mentor them, we can coach them in life. But because we've been geared towards thinking around selfishness, around greed, we cannot see that particular thing. We only see how we should take care of ourselves and those who are immediately associated with us. And I think that's our current challenge. And that's the difficulty in the psychology of a Black person at this moment. And it's not, so I'm saying those in power have mirrored that to the bottom of society. Even the majority in society have adopted that same thing. And if you look at it, most of us, our vision is not to become creators, but to get into that system so we can also utilize those limited resources for our benefits and not for the development of the masses. Thank you, Tawa. Let me hold it there.
No, thanks, Comrade Malala, for your input. And you've made a number of interesting points with regard to how you see the psychology of Black people in general, and those in leadership. And what comes out clear is that there is an issue of greed and there is an issue of selfishness, and which then results in those in power not doing what they're supposed to be doing with regard to addressing the inequality and poverty of our people. And now the real question I have for you is, what made this to come about? I mean, what this kind of psychology in Black leadership in particular, what is the genesis of this kind of behavior and conduct? And I really want us to explore the mind of a Black leader in government. These people came to power, and the intention was for Black people to take over and improve the condition of the Black person. And now we're seeing these people perpetuating the same system of oppression, the same system of dominance of those who have against the have-nots. Is it a question of the white power structure continuing to sustain itself in a manner that disables those who are in power to do what is right. Because, you know, there's this feeling that, you know, these people are in power and these people are supposed to be governing the land and governing the country, and yet they seem to be looking elsewhere for guidance, and they seem to be, for a lack of a better word, complainants instead of resolvers of the complaints that come from, you know, the majority of people who are suffering.
Right. Tawa, maybe can I use an illustration and comparison so I can explain my point? Right.
Sure.
So I don't think, again, it's something that, let me use an example of the Black People's Convention. So one of the things that the Black People's Convention did pretty well in the 70s was around a lot of community projects. So while they were working with people's psyche and fighting the liberation or the struggle overtly, but what I think they did very well, which demonstrate a huge differentiation from the Congress movement. What the BCP did very well was to have community projects. So if you remember the medical community projects they had in rural areas, some of the education they had towards children. So now it's a different kind of thinking that the organization is not saying, the organization is saying at some point we're going to get liberation, but you have to start now to prepare people's psyche for that liberation, to say you have to be accountable for your own actions. And the accountability for their own action was demonstrated by the medical doctors who were studying or who had completed being involved in community and developing the community then. Now, if you look at the Congress movement, this is a sort of a comparison. The premise they move from is that the land belongs to everyone and everything belongs to everyone to share, right? Which is not necessarily a problem. But if you look at the history, maybe, and again, I'm not very well versed, but the literature that I've read does not demonstrate that they were involved in community projects to uplift their people. They were essentially leaders who people came running to solve their problems. And the leaders were not going back, empowering people to say, how do you solve these particular problems? Now, if you can see that two organizations who are saying, we want liberation for our people, but in fighting for the liberation, they adopt two different strategies. The one empowers people to say, let us go along together, so that when we get to the final point, you are able to take responsibility for your democracy or liberation. The other one says, don't worry, we will solve your problems. We will become your nanny. And when we we'll fight for liberation, we'll take all the credit. And in that process, what it does is elevates these people to a high level. They're not like the rest of us. And come democracy, these people are held in high regard. They're seen as the messiahs, the saviors of the masses, right? And if you're seen, you have that much power. And anyway, your philosophy and thinking has always been, ideology has always been that I'm the leader, I'm supposed to make decisions. You're not going to get your people to go along with you. The only time you're going to want them and need them is to make sure that they vote you in power. For the rest of the time, you really don't need them. You will do things as they benefit you. And the benefit for you, and this is again my thinking in this particular case, is that you want to be part of the system. So you'll go to the system, the owners of the system, to teach you how to operate that particular system and fulfill the needs of the system, so that you strengthen it. And anything that talks against that, you will fight off.
You know, I think the issue for me, Comrade Ndlazi, is that of wanting to be assimilated to a system that was there and continue to, you know, perpetuate the values of a system that was oppressive to you. If you look at, you know, whiteness and the way we looked at it as Black people in the past, we hated that system. And it was as though those who are in power now wanted to be in a position where they can then do what whiteness was doing to the majority of their people. And now that they are there, there doesn't seem to be a change in attitude, a change in behavior, and a change in reasoning and thinking, from those people who are in power. And the question that I really want us to understand is why is this thinking there in the majority of those who are in power? I mean, you look at the councillors that we are talking about. They go there, for greed. They go there for self-interest, and these are people who are supposed to be servicing communities and ensuring that people get serviced appropriately and properly. Could it be their consciousness is not that of sacrifice and service to the people, ensuring that which they're supposed to be doing, or that which they went to council for, is done? What in your mind makes these people behave in this fashion? Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here, my tab. So, I think for me, it's a challenging question to ask, but maybe if I can go back a little bit to or infer to some of the literature from Frantz Fanon.
Yes.
To think about when people engage with a system, with an oppressive system, there are probably a couple of ways to react. The one way is obviously to accept it and assimilate everything of that particular system, and you become it. You don't see the oppression necessarily. You think it is good for you. Somebody's doing something good for you. The other way is to fight it off, to say this is not right. But those who even fight it off can have different reactions. That the one reaction is that somebody can say, look, this is not right at all. These are the core problems with the system, and I want to change it totally so that I have a system that ensures that I'm totally liberated psychologically, physically, and emotionally, right? But someone can say, the system is wrong in as far as it does not allow me to be part of it. I want to embrace that particular system, right? I want to embrace it, but the only way for me to embrace it is that I must be included. And I think this is where some of the organizations have moved from. They moved from the premise of wanting to be included in that system, right? And if you want to be included in the system, you'll do anything and everything possible to ensure that you are part of it. Some will do at a very superficial level, and maybe this is where you see most of the councillors. At a very superficial level, it's about the wealth accumulation and the showing off of the wealth, and that's a very superficial level. But at a very deeper level is when somebody goes out of their way to maintain the system. And I think maybe some of our top leaders are deeply entrenched in the system. They want to go out of their way to retain the system, because obviously it has benefited them worldwide, but also it has made them, they've formed relationships with the powerful white people, and they feel that they're included in that system. Their children can go study anyway, the US or wherever, so they feel that they're okay. And overseas countries have embraced them to say, you've done well in terms of transition, you have not done this and that, which we've coached you over the years, and because of that, we don't see you as a terrorist. Now, what it does maybe to a person's self-esteem is that it lifts your self-esteem for a second to say that the master acknowledges me as one of them. I am fit to sit with them at the table. So it soothes your ego, it soothes yourself, it makes you feel good about yourself, and that's something that keeps you going, right? But at some point, what I think what happens in one's psyche is that then there is some contradiction to say, as much as I go back home in the township, in the rural area, my neighbors are still poor. They're not like me. They don't have the same opportunities. But I think what our leaders do to gratify themselves is that it's easy to carry a food parcel to give them, so that it makes you feel good that I'm contributing positively to my community. I'm not necessarily resolving the problem, because remember, as you, if you remember, Tawa, I deliberately used the word which is used in the government to say reduce poverty or alleviate poverty. And that word is powerful because it creates a particular discourse in your mind, and to say, I am alleviating poverty. I'm making people suffering slightly better. And it makes the person feel good about themselves for that moment. It makes the organization feel good about themselves because they are alleviating poverty.
And through the grants and all of that. So I just want to check something. You did seem to be somewhat against the grant system, all of these government departments, giving out grants to people in the name of poverty alleviation. And I'm just wanting to check with you, in a country where we see huge, unemployment levels, and what proposals would you put on the table if you had to be given an opportunity to then assist in the process of alleviation of poverty and suffering from by our people?
Okay.
So how do we resolve this problem?
All right. So I would, to a certain extent, I would retain the grant system, but with a slight deviation. Right? So it has its role, but I think it must be changed slightly. So, for example, my feeling would be parents must earn the right to get the grants. No one should be given a grant for free.
Yeah.
And how you earn is that you must be involved in your community. And by community, I mean that as a parent, you must at least go to attend parents' meeting. You must be involved in school. So if as a parent, you're not necessarily employed, maybe once a year or twice a year, you can go and help cleaning the school, right? So that your child goes to a clean school, clean environment. And if there's a parents' meeting, parents get involved. They must do something. So people must earn that right to get that money. So it shouldn't be given just because you have a child, right? You must do something, and that's the first thing. The second thing, which I think should be done, a majority of people who are on grants are single parents, and that in of its own is not a problem. But a majority of them tend to get children at a very young age. They themselves, in most cases, are not psychologically ready to have children. And I think government should have a support mechanism. We've got social workers who can train people around parenting skills, so that we also ease the burden of parents sometimes taking out the frustration on the children. Offer parenting skills, then they must attend probably on a monthly basis one session with a social worker where they're trained around parenting, effective parenting, and how to become involved. So you have those two things that parents. So on a monthly basis, the social worker will sign that I've attended these things, and then the school will also sign off, and then they earn the grant in that particular system to say that they are involved. What the unintended consequences of that will be is that parents will realize that there's so much that they can do for their children, even if they're not financially well off. But there are certain things that they can do for their children. Let me give an example. What interesting studies have demonstrated with, and I'll use America because they tend to do a lot of research around things, is that migrant people, especially Chinese and Indian people who move from Asia to the US, there was an interesting point where they noticed the majority of them tend to outperform American children. And the question was asked why. they thought that initially that they had higher IQs relative to American children, both white and Native American and African American. But when they tested them, they found that the IQ was similar to the rest. Then they wanted to find out other social factors that influence. Now, the interesting part was that when they studied the social factors, they found out that the parents are so much involved in their children's education. So after school, the children come home and explain to the parents what was done in class. Now, a 30 minutes explanation might sound like a useless thing, but what it does, it puts pressure and on the child to be disciplined, to listen in class, to practice what was done, and to explain it. Because remember, if you have to teach someone something, you have to have a certain level of understanding. Now, it's found that the children are much more focused in class because they know when they get home, the children are, the parents are going to, they have to explain or teach their children their parents what they did. Now, all of a sudden, and post that, they put in more homework, and the parents guide to make sure that the homework is done. They check, even if they don't understand, but they check to make sure that it's done. Now, that authority figure creates a certain level of stability.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the challenge comes with a lot of parents who are youngish and not emotionally stable to be involved. When they don't have those particular skills, they don't know what to do. The only time they get involved in the child's life is when the child comes back from school and say, I was given a star, I got an A. They say, yeah, we're happy. But beyond that, they're not really involved to making sure that the child excels in school, to make sure that if the child is involved in sport, the child excels. We're just hoping that the child will do it on their own, and then one day they'll come and solve all our problems when they're employed as a soccer star or a doctor. But we don't support them through the journey. Now, I'm saying a lot of young parents struggle with that, right? Not all of them, but a lot of, and if we can give them the support, we can guide them to become better. And this child grant will actually be more beneficial to a whole lot of parents, unlike the current system.
No, I hear you. I just want to then track back to the issue of Black leadership. When the president of the country stands in front of, Parliament, or saying, I declare that there will be no corruption with regard to funding for COVID-19 or any program for that matter. You already know that he's not telling the truth because, you did say greed and corruption are kind of embedded in our psyche as, people that are running leadership positions in the country, more especially the majority of what you refer to as Black people. It's a fact that the majority of Black people are supposedly in charge of the country, and yet they are the ones who are siphoning, millions of rands that are supposed to to help society develop, to advance. Would you say that is the new identity that resonates with a lot of Black leadership in this country? Or should we look at Black leadership, in the eyes of corruption, in the eyes of greed, in the eyes of selfishness, or is there a different lens, that we should look at, and how do we then resolve this, psyche of people if you are given an opportunity to advise, Ramaphosa?
Maybe, Comrade Ash, let me start by saying that trust is a currency, right? And the more that currency is not utilized properly, it gets depleted.
Yeah.
And I think most of society is at the point where the trust currency on the current leadership is very, very low.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that then people in general, especially those who are not necessarily in power or feel hopeless, they tend to generalize that to say that, if these ones are like that, it means that anyone who's in politics is like that. That's what they're going to bring us. We cannot trust them, right? I do not think that, I think there's a lot of political leaders out there who are not interested in, or are not necessarily greedy, who want to change the circumstances of this country. But I think it's about how they approach the masses, right? But I think the challenge is most organizations tend to approach the masses through elections. So it's fine to put an electoral document to say this is my manifesto, and majority of people really don't even vote with their minds; they vote with their hearts. You know, if you can guarantee that I get food parcels for that day and a T-shirt, I'll probably vote for you. But what you say really does not appeal. But also, what you say might say to me, most of our problems are going to be resolved over a 20-year period, and you are telling me 20 years, and I'm struggling now. I don't see that right. What I think maybe organizations should do slightly differently is go back to the to the roots and trust in people, and by being involved in community projects that people can see have a tangible change to their lives. And if we do that, we are at the community grassroots level. For example, again, we still have the issue of education, which is a major problem. Most schools in the townships, as much as funding for Black schools has gone up, right? It was probably on par with white schools per child rather, not necessarily, but per child, funding is on par for every child in this country. But the reality is that because Black schools have got a backlog of about 50 years, so even if you fund each child equally, because of the 50-year backlog, it's going to take a long time to be involved. And this is where organizations, this is where so the Black intelligentsia should say, how do we solve this problem at a very basic level and regain the trust of society? And it's about getting involved in those kind of educational projects to uplift and even to help teachers to be disciplined. Because the basic thing, I mean, if you have a problem where a teacher who cannot come to school on time, and the principal doesn't know what to do with it, a community should be involved to a certain extent to straighten out that, to help that process to be straightened out. And I think this is where leaders can regain the trust. If we do those little things, over time we regain the trust of the majority. And as we regain the trust of the majority, it's easier then to speak to other things that will change how people vote in this country. That's my thinking.
I hear you. And can we invite our participants to ask questions or comments? You can participate in the discussion by raising your hand, and then we'll recognize you. And then you can make your comment or ask a question. Thanks. Just in terms of culture, Comrade Ndlazi, what role do you think can our culture play in relation to identity and collectivity?
Ooh, yeah, another very difficult. So, Comrade Ashe, you see, maybe I think culture is a critical thing, but I think we need to ask ourselves, in the last maybe 40, 50 years, what culture have we created? And again, this is where I want to go back and give a very little example. Now, in terms of most Black people, the tradition and culture says that there must be respect for authority, you must respect your adults. It might not necessarily be your own parent, your neighbor, but there should be that same sense of respect for the parent, as a parent, adult as a parent. And also, as a parent, you have certain values and responsibilities towards your children. You want to make sure that the children of the community are taken care of. So and that's why I think that saying says it takes a village to raise a child. Because it takes a village to raise a child, you want to be involved to make sure that anything that you do has a positive impact in the child in your village, in your township, and in the neighboring township and the neighboring village. Now, again, and maybe I'm going back a lot to history, but I think we need to correct certain things in history. So you remember in the 80s, okay, let me start maybe with a bit of statistics. At some point throughout the world, in the late 60s to early 70s, there was an increase in teenage pregnancies. But the fascinating thing is that even in this country, generally, amongst white people and black people, the change is that in the late 70s, the teenage pregnancy amongst white people seems to have gone down and stabilized. It's not totally gone, but it's still there, but it has gone down a little bit. But amongst black people, it has still gone up. And I think there are a couple of factors that have contributed to this and that have created a problem for us. If you recall in the 80s, the precursor of AZAPO, before they changed, do you remember? There was, I think it was AZAPO before it's changed to COSAS. But AZAPO had a particular slogan of educate to liberate. Right? So it means that AZAPO saw the importance of education. It had its own problem with the education system, but the argument was that understand the system, work it so that, and criticize and build from it, right? If it means you totally destroy it, but have an understanding to build something. And COSAS at that point was saying, liberation now, education later. Right. But in saying that, there's a mind shift that happened to that organization. That organization started encouraging children to burn down schools, to destroy school property. And what you do in destroying school property is that in the same vein, you are destroying authority figures in society. You're saying teachers are not worthwhile, so you'll hurl stones at them and hurl insult at them because you do not see them as people who add value to your life. I think that's number one. Number two is that, unfortunately, in that era, again, this is anecdotal to me, so it's not necessarily a worldwide and national phenomenon, but it's anecdotal. At some point, I started seeing some of these COSAS comrades having these night vigils, and I started seeing people being accused of being impimpis. And if I look at some of the families, I don't think they were necessarily impimpis to the system, but because the parents and the father, as an authority figure, used to limit their children from going out at night. And in this case, the authority figure again was dehumanized, brought down to be a non-entity. So the two critical institutions of authority in society were destroyed. Now we come to an era where most of those people are now parents. What respect for authority will they have? Chances are zero. They do not see education as an important thing. They don't see the family structure as an important thing that should be utilized, right? And they do not understand their role as parents in terms of building their children. And for me, that's, to a certain extent, that's the kind of culture we've built in the last 40 years. It becomes very difficult. And we constantly say, this is not Black people's culture. But again, when we try to explain what is Black people's culture, the majority cannot hear it because what you're telling them does not resonate with their reality. And I think that's the challenge we have.
You know, I think that's where the cookie crumbles. Because if you look back at the reality as people knew it then, tracing back as you are doing to the 80s, the struggle at the time, by those people of the Congress movement, as you call them, was really about dehumanization of Black humanity, so to speak. And that culture and that way of life and that way of leading society was then seen to transcend beyond, the times of struggle to, when they went to the corridors of power. And it seems to me that that dehumanization project, or that violation of Black humanity, has somewhat continued into the realm of their leadership. And it is part and parcel of the embodiment of how Black life should be seen. And as a result, it doesn't seem like there is nothing, or there's anything wrong with violation of Blackness, violation of Black humanity. And now the real question is, we are here, and how do we change this? How do we change this frame of thinking, this reality that presents itself in this fashion?
My tower, yeah, that is a big psychological project.
Indeed. And you are one.
My tower, I think there are multiple levels where we should try to change that thinking. And maybe let me start at the very basic level, which is the family. At the family level, it's about understanding how we as parents to children, how do we, what messages are we sending to our children about Black people as Black people, right? So it's the little things that we do. Is there things like, there's nothing wrong, and my child goes to a private school, so I'm not going to say hurl insults and people say don't take your children to private schools. It's nothing necessarily wrong with doing that, right? If you can afford it, it's fine. But what you might want to look at is and be involved in the system to say, in those schools, do you have representation of your people as teachers or people in authority, or are your people only represented as cleaners and gardeners? One of the things that, for example, when I went to my school, is to say, what is the number of Black teachers they have? Because that for me was critical. At some point, I want my child to see a Black teacher in front of them. Because if you don't have a Black teacher in front of them, it says that the only symbol of excellence is white people. So maybe that's one of the things we need to do. But also at home, the kind of self-talk that we have about ourselves, the kind of investments that we do in ourselves, and also, how do we link up our children to communities that are more vulnerable in relation to, so maybe people would live in suburbs. How do you link up your children to communities that are more vulnerable, but do not create the sense that those communities are below you? For example, we shouldn't be always going to give people stuff. We take our children and our children see how good we are because we've brought food parcels, blah, 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 blah. Maybe what we could be doing is to say, how do we go to a community and start doing gardening projects in rural areas, right? There's a lot of land, and you'll know that most people in rural areas don't farm like they used to. So some of us have got great ideas on how we can help people to create cooperatives. And when you go there, we speak to our people, and even we get our children to understand that these are independent people who are self-sustainable. But the issue is to take them to the next level where they do not only self-sustain, but they make a profit in this particular system. And how do we converse those things? So it's the little things that we do. In schools, in communities, our involvement should not be seen as giving, because then we perpetuate this sense of Black people being non-entities or being dehumanized because somebody has to give them something. They cannot do things for themselves. I think that's one. Two, when we go and get involve ourselves maybe in educational projects. My tower, you'll see I have a particular liking to education because I constantly refer to education. Because I firmly believe our education system has got its problem, but I firmly believe that if we get involved in it, we can transform it, we can change it to our benefit. And sometimes it might mean doing the little things. We cannot transform everything overnight because we might not necessarily have the resources and the time. But if we go back to the schools that we're involved in and start by changing how the teachers, we might not necessarily. So for example, if we can influence the school governing bodies to run the PERSs much more effectively, we also contribute towards building, to creating certain resources. For example, a library in the school, a computer lab in the school, or whatever the school may need. But as we go, we carry the SGB along to make them see the importance of why, as alumni, we need to be involved in creating and enhancing the school, and thereby enhancing the prospect of the children who are in their school. So I think it's those little things that we can do over time. And obviously at the bigger level, there should be some level of coordination where organizations like AZAPO and others can coordinate us at a micro level to say, how do we do things at a micro level so that they all fit into one system? I think at the moment, unfortunately, there's also that vacuum where, unfortunately, our people have no, I'm going to use a very terrible example. If you think about the Broeder Bond, they were coordinating behind the scenes, right? And maybe we need to have something like that. Someone who coordinates for us behind the scenes, but who guides us. Not necessarily take the limelight, doesn't want the limelight, but guide us to say, these are what you want to do, influence this process behind the scenes, so that we start reshaping, and they start reshaping our minds in terms of what are the things that we do. I think that's where we should be going.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I mean, you have this close affinity to education, as you say, and what is your view with regard to the education framework of our country? I'm saying this in view of, the fact that the majority of people who vote the Congress movement back to power every 5 years are young people. And these are young people who have been educated through this system. And these are young people who are at the suffering end of, of the ANC. And these are the people who, see this as some kind of a value system that needs to be entrenched. We must go to power, and once we get there, we must be selfish, we must be greedy. And that's the value system right now. And that's what a lot of these young people aspire for. I want to be there, and I want to compete, and I want to, demonstrate that I can be wealthy, and all of these things that you were talking about. Is our education system framed correctly to address, these deficiencies in people's psychology?
Tawa, I do not think so. I do not think our education system is meant to train people to become thinkers or critical thinkers who are problem solvers. I think our education system is just trained us to become. I think what makes most of us excel in the system is if your ability to regurgitate information. If you can regurgitate information that you're given, chances are the likelihood that you'll proceed, and then you'll be seen as an excellent student, because wow, listen to how they're able to regurgitate this and that, right? But the moment you start criticizing certain things about the information you're given, it's not really looked at the essence of your criticism, but the problem is you're criticizing, and therefore you get marked down. And therefore, if the system encourages that kind of thinking, it doesn't create problem solvers, creators of new solutions. I think that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, is that also within that system, there are also problems. So the other problem is that over the last maybe, again, 30 years or so, we've said to everyone that your solution is get a matric exemption and go to university. If you get a degree, then you'll be sorted for life. You'll get a job. My apologies. You'll get a job and you'll be sorted, right? And most of our children have gone to universities and they still want to go to universities. But the question is it where most of the solutions are going to come from, right? So if, for example, we have a housing problem, right? So there might be civil engineers at varsity who can create solutions. But is the guy who's a bricklayer, are we saying that if we train bricklayers, can they not also probably solve problems to say, I see that the brick that I utilize takes so much cement, blah, blah, blah. Maybe there's a different way of creating as strong a brick with less cement. You get what I'm saying? So maybe we've emphasized on one thing so much, we've forgotten of other things that could help us create solutions. So I have multiple layers of problem solvers. But again, we go back to the ground root. We have a system that discourages people to become problem solvers. And they have to be able to regurgitate information. That's fine for them.
You know, the biggest worry in this country, Comrade Ndlazi, is you know, the real possibility that white people can come back and you know, legitimately run this country, largely because of the ineptitude of Black people, those who in power, largely because of corruption and all of these negative you know, things that Black people do on Black people. You were talking about, you know, the sense of, you know, symbols of excellence that are, you know, difficult to find in Black communities. And the real question is, how do we ensure that there are symbols of excellence within the Black community that, you know, young people can look up to, and that even those who are transcending to or ascending to power can, you know, look at those as, you know, examples of how Black leadership should be seen? Because I'm really interested in understanding how do we resolve this problem? How do we build a new psychology of Black leadership, you know, that can be seen and looked at as symbols of excellence, as symbols of how Black people should be seen, basically.
Okay. My tower, maybe again, it's for us to go and read history and implement what was done historic. So the Black consciousness movement has got a great history of community involvement. Yeah. And for, like I said, for people to regain a sense of trust, or for the currency of trust to be regained by people, we have to demonstrate through action. And whether people are in power or not, it's immaterial. What we know for a fact now is that the guys in power are not going to change. In all probabilities, they're going to continue as they are for the next 40, 50 years. I do not think they're going to change, right? Yeah. But I think those of us who are not in the corridors of power, who are not shackled by this sense of greed, have got an opportunity, a great opportunity. And the opportunity is to go back and say, what community projects can we start making? But community projects that have got a positive impact on the self-esteem of our people, that will create this sense in our people that they are problem solvers and not waiting with hand in cap for donations. Right. So a little thing like, again, education. How do we get involved in schools to make sure that our schools are well run? How do we get involved to make sure that our schools, our teachers excel? And we cannot measure excellence by the matric results only. It's about the input they get from when they start. How do we, let me give you a very stupid question, actually, example, a very stupid example. You know how when you go to most schools in the townships and you look at the toilets, how filthy they are. Exactly. People can't take off of the toilet. But what do we do to be involved in those schools to say, these are your facilities, to teach the children and the parents that those facilities must be taken care by themselves and no one else.
because your sense of pride is that when you are not feeling well, you have a running tummy, how are you going to sit in that particular toilet? Right? It's a little thing, but it's a critical thing, because already, if the toilet is kept clean at all times and everyone understands that it is their role and responsibility to make sure that the ablution facility is clean, it then reflects on their sense of pride. And those are the little things that we must do, because if we get those little things right, we can move those people to a bigger responsibility. But if we fail to work on the little things, it's going to be very difficult to say, now let's move on to project B, which is about computer labs, building computer labs. Because what's going to happen is that they're going to be stolen, those computers, the first day we buy them. And then the parents whose children are in the same school will see the thieves carrying the computer, and they will not mind. And they'll say, hey, these children, they steal everything, forgetting that that computer lab might have been stolen from the school that their child goes to, and they're not doing anything about it. But if we teach people to say the basic responsibilities, then we can take it a notch above. So slowly we build on stuff. I'm not sure if it makes sense what I'm explaining.
No, I hear you. I think this, one of the questions that people are asking is about, the Follis movement that has been seen in higher education now. And all of them seem to have embraced Fanon, Biko, and Sobukwe. And they talk about selflessness, they talk about, their sense of pride, so to speak, as informed by, Biko's theory and Fanon's theory. What can you advise them in order to achieve a real transformation of society? As a social movement, do you think they can impact society positively?
Tawa, I think they can, but I think it has to be. Maybe let me start here. Maybe part of the challenge is, so if you look, for example, at this fees must fall movement, there'll probably be a whole lot of variety. The other day I was listening to my wife, and she's saying, these guys are fighting for a good cause, right? But the mere fact that you tend to see them associated with vandalism, destroying of stuff, it doesn't really bode well. If they stand in front of a university and bend tires, she says, I ask myself a question. These are supposed to be intellectuals who are going to change now systems. But if they burn what they're supposed to utilize tomorrow, what are they saying about themselves? And for her, it says it doesn't give a positive role modeling. And maybe those are things we really need to think about. To say, yes, we need to engage hard. But do we really need to destroy property that we're dependent on? And how is it going to affect us tomorrow? And other things that the fees must fall movement, for example, can engage with the black middle class, for examtle, to say, how is the black middle class supposed to be involved? And maybe they should bring us into their confidence. And maybe the black middle class is stuck because it doesn't know where it has to go. It might be them actually who guides the black middle class as to where to go next, how the black middle class should be, how to unite the black middle class and take it forth as a unit. Right. But I think they're alienating themselves from the black middle class. In fact, they're alienating themselves even from the poorest of the poor, because by destroying certain things, the poor kind of think, the adults might be a bit conservative and think, do I really want my child to be involved with this? And miss the essence of the good thing that they want to achieve. Let me hold it there out.
I think we can hold it there. And it's been an interesting 1.5 hours discussion, and I'm sure we can talk until 5 p.m. So I wouldn't want to keep people here for that long, and I think we can just end it there for today. And thank you for coming to the platform and share your views about what you think with regard to the psychology of Black people, more especially those people in power. Because the reality is that at the end of the day, we need to come to a point where we say this is what needs to be done.
Yes.
Change society, and there's a lot of work for Black consciousness teaching in this country, and just to change the psychology of people about power and about pride and about themselves, and ensure that at the end of the day we develop new value systems, we develop new people out of us as a people. And thanks for your time, and thanks for sharing this platform with us this afternoon. Week, Sunday, same time, we will be hosting Professor Rothni Chaka. I'm sure you know him. He's also your alma mater from the University of Western Cape. We will be talking the resurrection of Blackness from the dead. I look forward to that conversation. It's going to be a very interesting discussion with Professor Chaka. Comrade Malala Ndlazi, thank you for spending your afternoon with us, and it's been great. And want to thank everybody else who connected with us this afternoon, and leave it there for today until next Sunday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maitao.
Thank you.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Listen, the struggle was not red. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're proud, too strong. The worst is over.